In the village of Oguta, where red earth met tall Iroko trees and evening fires burned long into the night, there lived a young man the whole village agreed was both the best and the most foolish person they had ever seen. His name was Emeka. He was not the tallest man in Oguta. Not the strongest, and certainly not the richest. But if you needed someone to sit with you through a long night of sickness, Emeka would be there before you finished asking. If your roof fell in the rain, he would carry thatch on his back before you found someone else to complain to. The elders loved him. The children followed him like small shadows. Even the village dogs trusted Emeka more than they trusted their own owners. But the young men, they laughed. They called him the faithful fool. Not because he was stupid. Emeka could solve riddles. His memory was sharp like a new blade. They called him a fool because he kept giving to people who kept taking. He kept trusting people who kept lying. One day, his neighbor Mama Nkechi always said, shaking her head, that boy's goodness would destroy him. She said it like a warning. She said it like a prophecy. She did not know she was only half right. Now, every story has two sides, and the other side of this one had a name. Dyke. If Emeka was the kind of fire that warms a room, Dyke was the kind that looks beautiful from far away but burns you the moment you come close. Dyke had the face of a man the ancestors had been generous to, sharp jaw, easy smile, eyes that made women forget what they were carrying to the market. He walked like someone who had already won every competition he had not yet entered. Dyke and Emeka had been friends since they were boys who chased lizards together near the stream. But somewhere between childhood and manhood, something shifted inside Dyke like a stone slowly rolling downhill. He began to notice that people loved Emeka without reason. Without wealth. Without beauty. Without anything Dyke could point to and compete with. And that simple, quiet truth made Dyke's chest tight in a way he never spoke about out loud. He still called Emeka his brother. He still shared meals with him, laughed with him, walked the village roads beside him. But behind that easy smile, Dyke had started to count every good thing Emeka had. And he had started to want them all. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning when the harmattan wind was blowing dry and the chief's messenger walked through the village beating his small drum. People dropped their hoes. Women stopped pounding. Children ran toward the sound. The messenger stood in the center of the village square and spoke in a voice trained to carry far. Hear the words of Chief Obiora. His daughter, Adiz, has come of age. She is ready for marriage. The chief will not give her to the highest bride price. He will not give her to the most handsome face. He will give her to the man who passes 3 tests. Any man who wishes to try must present himself at the chief's compound at the next full moon. The crowd buzzed like a shaken beehive. Adiz was not just beautiful. She was known across 5 villages as a woman of deep wisdom and quiet strength. Men who had seen her once talked about her for years. Even women who should have been jealous admitted that Adiz carried herself like someone the sky had personally taken time over. To marry her was to marry good fortune itself. Every young man in Oguta began calculating his chances before the messenger had even finished speaking. That evening, Emeka sat outside his small mud house, watching the sky turn orange, thinking about nothing in particular, which was one of his favorite things to do. Dyke came and sat beside him, his voice carrying the excited energy of a man with a plan. "Brother," Dyke said, "you heard the announcement." Emeka nodded slowly. "You are not going to try, are you?" Dyke asked. His voice was casual but his eyes were watching carefully. Emeka smiled that soft smile of his. "I don't know. I haven't thought about it." Dyke laughed. Good. Good. Because men like us, simple men, we don't win things like that. Those competitions are for men with power. With influence. You understand? The chief already has someone in mind. These tests are probably just a show. Emeka looked at him. Then why do you look like a man who has been sharpening a knife since morning? Dyke laughed again, louder this time. Me? No. I'm just talking. But he was not just talking. Dyke had already decided he would win at this. And he had already decided something else, quietly, deep inside a part of himself he never examined in the light. He needed to make sure Emeka did not compete. The days before the full moon were restless in Oguta. Young men trained and sharpened their boast. Mothers whispered prayers over their sons. Old women sat in doorways and predicted outcomes with the confidence of people who had seen everything twice. Emeka watched it all with quiet curiosity. He had not decided to enter the contest. But something kept pulling at the back of his mind, soft and persistent, like a child tugging a wrapper. It was Mama Nkechi who finally pushed him. She found him carrying water for an elderly man whose children had gone to the city and forgotten to send money home. Emeka was on his third trip, shoulders damp, legs tired. Emeka, Mama Nkechi called. Put that pot down for a moment. He put it down. She looked at him the way older women look at young men they have watched grow from helpless babies into something worth worrying about. Enter the contest, she said. Me? Emeka blinked. You. She pointed at his chest. Not because of Addis. Not for the title. Enter because it is time this village saw what a faithful man looks like when the world is watching. She picked up her broom and walked away. Emeka stood there a long time. Then he picked up the water pot and kept walking. Word traveled fast in Oguta. Word traveled fastest when it involved something people did not expect. When the village heard that Emeka had added his name to the list of men entering the contest, the laughter started before sunset. The faithful fool wants to be a chief's son-in-law. Maybe Addis will need someone to fetch her water in the palace. Emeka is a good man. A good man. But goodness doesn't win contest. Cleverness does. Strength does. Does Emeka have either? The laughter reached Dyke by evening. He heard it and smiled. Let them laugh. Laughter was useful. It kept Emeka small in the village's eyes. And a man who felt small might withdraw. Might decide the contest wasn't worth the humiliation. Dyke visited Emeka that same night. He sat across from him and arranged his face into something that looked like concern. Brother, he said carefully. I heard you entered the contest. Yes. I worry about you. Dyke shook his head. The village already has a name for you. If you lose, and you will lose, they will never let you forget it. Emeka chewed slowly on a piece of sugarcane. He offered Dyke some. Dyke took it. I know, Emeka said quietly. But I'm going to try anyway. Dyke nodded. He smiled. Inside, something tightened. 3 nights before the full moon, something happened that the village would talk about for weeks. Emeka had set aside a small pot of palm oil, saved over 2 months of extra work, to use as a gift when he presented himself at the chief's compound. In Oguta, a man without a proper gift at the chief's door had already failed before speaking. He stored it carefully under his sleeping mat. In the morning, it was gone. Emeka searched his entire house twice. The pot was simply not there. He sat on the floor and felt the particular quiet that falls over a person when disappointment is too big for immediate noise. His neighbor's boy found him sitting there and asked what happened. Emeka told him. By afternoon, half the village knew. By evening, the other half had decided he must have been careless with his own property. No one suspected Dyke. But 3 compounds away, hidden beneath old sacks in Dyke's storage room, a small pot of palm oil sat waiting to be regifted with a different story attached to it. Emeka did not know this yet. What he knew was simple. He had nothing to present at the chief's door. He had 3 days to solve a problem he had not created. Emeka did not beg. That was one thing about him, he would work before he would beg. He rose before the sun and went to the farm of old Baba Choku, the oldest farmer in Oguta, whose hands had grown too slow for his own ambitions. "I will clear your backfield today," Emeka said. "All of it. In exchange for a fair portion of what you have stored." Old Baba Choku looked at him for a long time. He had seen many young men and learned that most bargained when they needed something and disappeared when they did not. Emeka had helped his farm before without asking for anything. "Clear the field," the old man said. "We will talk when you finish." Emeka walked through the heat without stopping. His hands blistered. His back ached. When he finished, Baba Choku's backfield looked like it had been tended by 4 men for a week. The old farmer looked at the work for a long time without speaking. Then he went into his store and brought out a large, generous gift, enough palm oil, enough kola nut, enough to walk to the chief's door with his head properly high. "Go well," Baba Choku said. That night, Emeka slept deeply for the first time in days. The full moon came the way important nights always do, quietly, as if the sky was trying not to disturb what was about to happen. 12 young men gathered at the chief's compound. Some wore wrappers so bright they looked uncomfortable. Some had oiled their skin until they reflected firelight like water. Dyke stood near the front, relaxed, greeting people with the ease of a man who had already written the ending in his head. Emeka stood near the back, his wrapper clean and simple, his gift held in both hands. The chief emerged. Chief Obiora was not a tall man, but when he sat, the space around him rearranged itself out of respect. He had the eyes of someone who had heard 1,000 lies and could smell the next one from 3 villages away. He looked at the 12 men slowly. His gaze moved without hurry, like a fisherman reading water before casting. When his eyes passed over Emeka, they paused. One small moment nobody noticed except Emeka, who felt it like a warm hand on his shoulder. Then the chief spoke. "The first test begins tomorrow at dawn. Come with empty hands and open ears. What you will need cannot be carried. It can only be grown." Nobody understood. But everyone pretended they did. The first test was this. In the middle of the village square, the chief's servants had placed a very old woman. She was bent like a question mark, her wrapper faded, her eyes cloudy. Beside her was a heavy load, firewood, yams, a large water pot, that needed carrying to the far end of the village. The chief spoke clearly. "This woman is a stranger here. She has no family. She needs help. The first man to carry her load to the elder's shrine completes the first test." The 12 men looked at each other. Several moved quickly, reaching for the load. But the old woman raised one hand and stopped them with a voice stronger than her appearance suggested. "I did not ask a horse for help," she said. "I asked a person. Greet me first. Ask my name. Then we will talk about the load." The men stepped back, embarrassed. One by one, they greeted her. Some were polite. Some were hurried. The old woman watched their eyes with her cloudy gaze and said nothing. When Emeka reached her, he knelt so that his eyes were level with hers. "Good morning, mother," he said. "My name is Emeka. What is yours?" The old woman smiled for the first time. Her name was Mama Udo. And she talked. She talked the way very old people talk when someone finally gives them the gift of a listening ear, slowly, carefully, filling every sentence with something real. Emeka listened. He listened about her son who had traveled to the city and sent no word back. He listened about her late husband, who used to make her laugh by imitating the village crier. He listened about the particular way yam porridge should be cooked if you want it to taste like childhood. The other 11 men stood watching, shifting their weight, growing impatient. Dyke in particular could not understand what was happening. Was this a listening contest? He calculated quickly and decided to be strategic. He would greet the old woman, say kind words, then carry the load fast. Efficiency. That was the key. But when Dyke knelt and greeted Mama Udo and tried his version of warmth, the old woman looked at him the way a person looks at a well-cooked meal that tastes like nothing. She nodded politely. Her eyes said something else. After nearly an hour, Emeka stood and lifted the load onto his back without being asked. "Shall we go, mother?" Mama Udo stood slowly. "Yes, my son. Let us go." They walked together slowly, the old woman and the young man with a heavy load, through the village that was watching with wide eyes and opinions. Emeka did not rush her. He matched her speed. When she stopped to catch her breath, he stopped too. When she pointed to a tree and said her husband once climbed it as a young man, Emeka looked at it as if it was the most interesting tree he had ever seen. Dyke followed at a distance, carrying nothing, calculating. When they finally reached the elder's shrine, Emeka set the load down gently. Mama Udo turned to face him. But her eyes were no longer cloudy. They were clear. Bright. Watching. She looked at Emeka for a long moment. Then at the other men who had arrived. Chief Obiora stood to the side, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. "Who passed the first test?" someone asked. The chief turned to Mama Udo with a slight bow. The old woman pointed without hesitation. "This one," she said simply. "He did not just carry my load. He carried my loneliness. That is the only man worth marrying my granddaughter." The square went very quiet. Mama Udo was the chief's mother. "Let me pause here and tell you something. In Oguta, when the earth speaks, the wise man bends to listen. But when the proud man hears the earth speak, he bends to argue." That was Dyke after the first test. He went home and could not sleep. He sat in his compound and rebuilt the story in his mind, finding the angle where he was still the man who should have won. He decided the test was unfair. He decided Emeka had known in advance that Mama Udo was the chief's mother. He decided there had been cheating. By morning, this version had spread, not because Dyke told it directly, but because he told it to two people with loose lips and let them do the rest. Emeka knew she was the chief's mother. He had information the rest didn't. Some believed it. Some didn't. Some were unsure, and being unsure made them treat Emeka with a new distance that felt almost like suspicion. Emeka heard the rumors by midday. He said nothing. He carried his firewood home. He cooked his evening meal. He helped his neighbor's son with a school problem. Inside, he felt the quiet ache of being misread. But he did not let it change him. He could absorb pain without becoming it. 2 days passed before the second test. On that morning, Emeka woke to find someone had scattered his firewood across the road. A week's worth of carefully gathered wood, thrown in the mud where passing feet would break and dirty it. He stood in his doorway and looked at the mess. Mama Nkechi appeared at her window across the road. "I saw nothing," she said quietly. "But I heard a midnight sound I recognized." She did not say whose. She did not need to. Emeka picked up his wood piece by piece, cleaning each one, stacking it back. It took 2 hours. He arrived at the village square late. The other men were already there. Dyke looked at him with an expression very close to innocent. Chief Obiora noticed the late arrival and the mud on Emeka's sandals. "The second test requires 1 night," the chief announced. "Each of you will complete a task alone in the dark forest before sunrise. The task is the same for all." He paused. "Find the red flower near the old well at the forest center. Bring it back before the morning bird sings. Do not harm anything in the forest." 11 men exhaled slowly. The old well was deep in the forest. No one went there after dark. The forest at night in Oguta was not the same forest you walked through in the day. In the day, it was tall trees, singing birds, and wet leaves. At night, it became something else, a breathing darkness full of sounds without names and shadows that moved when you were not looking at them. The 11 men entered one by one, each carrying a small lamp. Emeka entered last. He had gone 200 steps when his lamp flickered and died. The oil had been tampered with. It burned out in minutes instead of hours. He stood in complete darkness and breathed slowly. He could turn back. Say the lamp failed. No one would fully blame him. He stood there a long moment, listening. Then he began to walk. He could not see the path. He followed water sounds instead, a distant trickling he remembered from his childhood, when he and Dyke had chased a frog all the way to the old well and back, laughing the entire time. The memory of that laughter was both a comfort and a pain. He kept walking. The darkness was heavy. The sounds were strange. But Emeka had spent his whole life doing difficult things alone. This was simply another version of that. He found the old well by sound before he found it by sight. When clouds shifted and a thin line of moonlight reached through the trees, Emeka saw it, the stone lip of the old well, moss-covered and ancient, and growing from the cracked ground beside it, a single red flower. He knelt and looked at it for a long time. Do not harm anything in the forest to get it. He could not simply pull it from the ground. That would harm it. He sat and thought, and a memory came, Baba Choku showing him how to lift a seedling without breaking its roots. How you had to loosen the soil first. How you had to go gently and with great patience. Emeka carefully loosened the earth around the flower using a small stick. He walked slowly. The moonlight helped. After a long time, he lifted the flower with its full root, wrapped it in wet moss from the well's edge, and held it in his cupped hands. He turned to go. At the well's edge, he heard something behind him. A sound like controlled breathing. He turned. Dyke stood in the shadows holding the red flower he had pulled directly from the ground, root snapped, stem bent. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. They walked back through the forest without a word. The silence between them had weight, the kind that holds everything never said out loud. When they emerged from the tree line, the sky was beginning to lighten. The morning bird had not yet sung. They had both made it in time. The other 9 men arrived in small groups, most empty-handed. The forest had frightened several back before they reached the well. 2 had found the flower but crushed it, carrying it out quickly. Of the 11, only Emeka and Dyke returned with the red flower. They were brought before Chief Obiora together. The chief looked at both flowers carefully without touching them. Dyke's flower was red and bright, but its roots were torn and the stem cracked near the base. It would not survive another day. Emeka's flower sat in his cupped hands, roots intact, wrapped in moss, still alive. Chief Obiora looked up. I said do not harm anything in the forest, he said quietly. He looked at Dyke's flower. This was harmed. Dyke opened his mouth. I was careful. The flower tells its own story, the chief said. He looked at Emeka's hands. Then at Emeka's face. He nodded once. The way a man nods when something confirms what he already suspected. 2 tests passed. 1 remained. Dyke returned home and the thing inside his chest that had been tight for weeks was now hard as dry clay. He sat alone for a long time. He was not a bad man. That is important to say. He was a man who had looked at his reflection in a dirty puddle and mistaken the murkiness for the truth of his face. He had told himself small lies for so long they became the furniture of his mind, comfortable, familiar, impossible to imagine living without. He believed, truly believed, that he deserved Adis. That he deserved recognition. That Emeka, kind, faithful Emeka, was somehow stealing from him without knowing it. That belief led him to a decision. He went to the home of a woman on the far side of the village. A woman who knew things. Who knew how to prepare certain powders that could confuse a man's thoughts or weaken his courage at the wrong moment. He did not tell himself what he was doing. He told himself he was simply making sure the right person won. That is how most cruelty begins, you know. Not with the desire to harm, but with the desire to deserve, and the willingness to cheat in order to prove it. The night before the final test, Dyke came to Emika's house. He brought food, a bowl of pepper soup, still warm and fragrant. He set it on Emika's table and smiled that old smile, the one from when they were boys chasing lizards. "Brother," he said. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we are still friends." "Yes." Emika looked at the soup. Then at Dyke. His eyes were quiet, like deep water. "Yes," Emika said. "We are still friends." He reached for the bowl. Then stopped. Not because of suspicion. Not calculation. He stopped because an old habit moved through him, one his mother taught him when he was very small. Give the first portion to someone who needs it more than you. He walked to the door. His elderly neighbor was passing, a man who rarely had hot food at night. "Uncle," Emika called. "Come and eat. I have more than enough." The old man's eyes lit up. He came in and ate without ceremony, grateful and happy. Dyke watched from the doorway, his expression perfectly still. He said good night. He walked home. He sat in the dark for a long time. And somewhere between midnight and morning, something in Dyke cracked open, not with anger, but with sudden terrible clarity about who he had become. His third test was announced at sunrise in the village square. Every person in Ogute came. Those who had been to every test and those who only came for the ending. Mothers brought children on their backs. Old men brought their stools. Even people from nearby farms who had heard the story came to watch. Chief Obiora stood before the remaining men, now only 7. The others had withdrawn or failed. Adi stood beside her father for the first time. She was as described. But what no description had captured was her stillness, the way she stood like a woman who had made peace with being watched and had found something more interesting to think about instead. Her eyes moved over the men slowly, without performance. When her gaze reached Emika, it paused. Just slightly. Then continued. "The final test," Chief Obiora said, "is not a task. It is a question." The crowd murmured. "Each man will be brought one person from this village. A person who has wronged them in some way, small or large. In front of this village, in front of the ancestors, you will decide what to do. Not with your strength. Not with your cleverness. With your heart." Silence. This was not the kind of test anyone had prepared for. The men were brought their persons one by one. For some it was a man who cheated them in a land dispute. For one it was a brother who took an inheritance. For another, a woman who spread false rumors during a difficult time. The responses varied. Most men were polite. Some managed something that looked like forgiveness but felt performed, the kind that holds a ledger behind its back while smiling. The crowd watched and weighed each response with the seriousness of people who understood that character is most visible when it is surprised. Then it was Emika's turn. The chief's servant walked forward. Beside him was Dyke. The crowd held its breath. Emika and Dyke stood facing each other in front of the entire village. The stolen palm oil. The scattered firewood. The tampered lamp. The doctored soup. All of it hung in the air like smoke everyone could smell but had never named out loud. Dyke stood very still. His jaw was tight. His hands loose at his sides. For the first time since they were boys, he looked like a man who did not know what to say. He looked like a man seeing himself clearly. And he did not like what he saw. Emika looked at Dyke for a long time. The village watched. Not one person spoke. Even the children had gone quiet in the way they go quiet when adults are doing something real. Emika's face did not carry anger. It did not carry the false brightness of a man performing forgiveness for an audience. It carried something older and quieter. The look of someone who had already done the hard internal work and arrived at the other side. He spoke slowly. Dyke, he said. We grew up drinking from the same stream. I know you. Not the you the village sees. The you that sits alone when the fire is low. The you that wanted things so much that wanting itself became something that hurt you. Dyke's jaw moved. His eyes were bright. You took from me more than once. I knew. I did not speak because I believed the boy who chased lizards with me was still inside you somewhere. Silence. He is, Emeka said. I can still see him. He stepped forward and placed a hand on Dyke's shoulder. I forgive you, brother. Completely. Not for this village. I forgave you before today. I am only saying it now so you can stop carrying it. Dyke's shoulders fell. His whole body seemed to exhale. Something happened in that square that people in Oguta would try to describe for years and never quite succeed. It was not magical. No lightning. No voice from the sky. It was quieter than that. More certain. Adis, who had stood composed through every test, turned to look at Emeka directly. Not the polite look she had given all the others. The real look. The kind that means, I see you. Not the version of you the village built. You, Chief Obiora looked at his mother, Mama Udo, who stood near the edge of the crowd. She nodded once. He turned to the village. You have seen 3 tests. 7 men. You have seen what different hearts look like when surprised. He paused. My mother raised me with one lesson above all others. A man who is kind only when it is convenient is not kind. He is strategic. But a man who is kind when it costs him something, that man has a character the world cannot buy. He looked at Emeka. This village has called you the faithful fool. Emeka met his eyes calmly. I am giving you a new name today, the chief said. In front of the ancestors and everyone here. Your new name is Nubizi. It means life is the highest rank. Now I must tell you what happened to Dyke. Because this story is not about punishment. It is about truth. And the truth is that Dyke stood in that square and was broken open, not by shame, not by humiliation, but by the one thing he had never learned to survive. Being genuinely forgiven. Emeka's words had gone into Dyke like water into dry soil. He had prepared for anger. He had prepared for exposure and dignified defeat. But he had not prepared for grace, the pure, uncalculated kind that does not demand repayment. He stood in the village square and cried. Not the crying of performance. The crying of a man who has carried something very heavy for a long time and has finally been told he is allowed to put it down. In the weeks after the wedding was announced, Dyke changed. Quietly, without announcement. He returned the palm oil, or its worth. He helped repair the road where he had scattered the firewood. People noticed. People always notice. Some said it would not last. Perhaps. But the elders say a man who has seen his own face clearly, truly clearly, at least has the chance to wash it. That chance is more than most people give themselves. The wedding of Emeka and Adis was held on a Saturday when the sky was so blue it looked freshly painted. The whole village came. People from 3 neighboring villages came. Old Baba Choku arrived in his best wrapper, walking with a stick, smiling like a man who had invested wisely. Mama Nkechi cried before the ceremony and then pretended she had something in her eye. Emeka stood at the front looking exactly like himself, clean wrapper, steady eyes, that familiar quiet the village had once mistaken for simplicity. Adis walked toward him. He walked toward her. Somewhere in the crowd someone said softly, the faithful fool one. An old woman nearby shook her head. No, she said. He didn't win anything. He just stayed himself long enough for the world to catch up. That is the lesson Oguta kept. Not that goodness is always rewarded, the elders are too honest for such comfort. But that a man who bends without breaking, gives without keeping score, and forgives without forgetting what he forgave, that man does not walk through the world unseen. The ancestors see everything. The earth remembers every seed. Faithfulness, true faithfulness, is never foolish. Drop a comment. Was Emeka truly a fool? Or was he the wisest man in Oguta all along?